Home, sweet home. The Florida Panthers will be starting the first round at home. And now the Panthers have gotten their game right and have turned it around as far as going to the box versus their opposition.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, April 15th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. So, Florida Panthers, they have completed 3 out of the 4 games during this homestand to finish the season. And my goodness, we are 1 game away or 5 days away from the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it's one of the best times of the year in the sports calendar. And this will be a good time to bring in my guest on the show here to talk about all of this. And he is a very familiar voice. You could hear him from time to time on the pre-intermission and post-game of the Florida Panthers Radio Network. And he's also the host of Locked On Canes and Locked On ACC. He is Alex Donno. Alex, welcome to the show, my friend.
Armando, thank you so much for having me. You do an awesome job, and I've been excited watching the Cats this year. There have been so many close games, big wins, comebacks, overtime finishes like the one that we had over the weekend. 55 Sam Reinhart goals this year. It's been a great journey, and I'm so glad that something we've known for quite some time, obviously, that the Panthers would be continuing that journey into the postseason this year, but the opportunity to be able to have home ice advantage, at least for the first round, is something that I don't take for granted either.
Yeah, same here. And it's just also it's just been an exciting weekend and a whole week of sports. I mean, you had the Masters go on. Big congratulations to Scotty Scheffler, now winning 2 out of the last 3 Masters tournament. You had the final push for the NBA play-in and now you're getting everything for the NHL locked in as far as their seeds. It's the Florida Panthers. Their seed is not locked in officially. We'll know more when the Boston Bruins take on the Washington Capitals tonight from Capital One Arena. But when you think about this game for the Florida Panthers, I mean, the goals came in early for both teams, but then goaltending really took over. I mean, Sergei Bobrovsky with that incredible save on Jeff Skinner with the leg. I mean, you have Sam Bennett after Bobrovsky kind of kicks the puck towards the goal line and then him sacrificing himself and not getting it cleanly the first time. I mean, the Buffalo Sabres also had one on their end with Owen Power, which Owen Power, if he's going to be a superstar if he's not already too. But as far as the Florida Panthers, their ability to tilt the ice, even though they didn't get that late goal until the overtime period, which I tweeted saying that play alone that Sasha Barkov made to get it to Sam Reinhart, to where it was originally stripped on the back check, and then for Barkov to strip it back and get it to Sam Reinhart for goal number 55. I mean, Donno, that play alone just defines Barkov and what he does on both ends of the ice.
He's one of the most complete players in the NHL, Armando. And he's, based on, his career, his body of work, he's got the quiet demeanor. He is the Panthers captain. He's a great leader by example. And his teammates, current and former, all respect him so much. And, you really understand all the way he contributes to this hockey team. And I know that we all want him to win the Selke trophy again. He did get that. It goes back in 2021 when he finally won the Selke after deserving it for so many years and being passed over. I think we can win that again. I mean, Barkov, even when he's not always lighting the lamp and scoring, he contributes in so many ways, getting his teammates involved, and then the goals always do end up coming for him. But he's a distributor. He's an ultimate teammate. and he has so much. It's like having an extra defenseman on the ice, but he happens to be, a top line centerman. So, I mean, Barkov to me deserves every accolade he gets. And I know the next accolade he wants is, of course, the biggest team award, and that would be a Stanley Cup. Got pretty close to that, at least getting to the finals last year. Hopefully this is the year he can take home that piece of hardware.
No doubt. And the Panthers, they're going to have to be, health is definitely going to be a factor for them too in order to get there. And speaking of that, I mean, the Panthers avoided serious injuries with Ulrich Larson losing him after the first period, which Paul Maurice said that it was just something that tightened up, that he is going to likely miss the Tuesday game against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Also, that 5-minute major that Connor Clifton had on Nick Cousins, where he was able to come back and we've seen what happened when Cousins got hit up high back in January against the Arizona Coyotes. But with that, that's very important as far as health. And also, Paul Maurice spoke about multiple times, if there's something to play for on Tuesday with the Boston Bruins, if they end up losing on tonight, there will be something to play for. But there's a little bit of part of me, Alex, that I it's not necessary that you want Boston to win, but it's just like you want to go into game 82 with not put so much stock in it. It's not really about avoiding Tampa Bay. That's not my mindset behind it, but it's just really about getting the Tobias Bjornfot's in, the Josh Mahura's in too. At Kyle Okposo, don't know how much he's going to play in the playoffs, and Anthony Stolarz one more game. So I'm not keeping an eye on Boston. I'm keeping an eye on Bruins Capitals tonight, but I'm not putting so much emotional stock in it as far as what the Panthers are going to do tomorrow. How are you looking at that?
No, I look at it the same way. I think control what you can control. And I think that if anything, the big lesson that Florida's players and Paul Maurice learned from last year, where they had to just scratch and claw their way into the playoffs, before eventually making a Stanley Cup Finals run. And that, came not long after a President's Trophy and a disappointing playoff run. I think these guys have learned that instead of worrying about other teams, seedings and matchups, we just need to worry about ourselves, staying healthy, avoiding those injuries like you talked about is key, because that obviously by the time the Panthers got to the Stanley Cup Finals last year, they were pretty decimated by injury. And so, the playoff run is what it is. It's a grind once you get through the postseason to make it that far. But in terms of getting out of the regular season without any further serious injuries, that's an important thing to me. And I think that this team does a great job blocking out all the outside noise and focusing on themselves. And something that I strongly believe, as big as it was on Saturday to clinch home ice for at least the first round, I feel like, Armando, that's bigger for the fans than it is for the players. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, Panthers fans, I've been so amazed by the turnaround, just in terms of the fan enthusiasm. I give ownership, I give Bill Zito so much credit for what they've done, because, I've had the privilege of, some years as the permanent guy, other years as a rotating guy, like in recent years, being able to work some of these Florida Panthers broadcasts on the radio, being in the arena. And I started doing this 9-10 years ago. And I remember, a lot of empty arenas, a lot of lack of fan support, some uneven results on the ice. Now the results have been there. The fans are coming around. But as far as the players are concerned, having home ice is nice. But it's not everything, because they showed you they can get through the Stanley Cup playoffs last year all the way to the finals, even being underdogs and having to go on the road for 4 out of 7 games. So these players, I think, have that battle mentality where they want to go out there and win hockey games, whether it's at home or on the road. But Mondo, I do think Panthers fans deserve it. Like, Panthers fans deserve, if it does end up being, Florida versus Toronto in the first round, which would be really fun, because I know a lot of the fans up there would try to come down and buy as many seats as possible, but the Panthers fans will show up strong. But the Panthers fans deserve this. If the series would go 7, to have that 7th game on home ice, I think is something huge, but it's not something I think that's make or break for the players. The players just want to go out there and battle, whether they're on home ice or on the road.
Yeah, and I think starting at least the postseason at home, it's the tone. It's a tone setter for what could come later, as far as getting the region already pumped up for it. It is already to begin with, but to get it right from the start of the postseason and then build off of that it could definitely help result in some wins for the Panthers for sure. So that's really what we're hoping there as far as that for the Cats. But we are going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about Anton Lundell, 4 goals out of his last 6. More about Bill Zito, something that he is doing outside of the Florida Panthers organization, and we're going to discuss more later on too the penalty difference also between the Florida Panthers and their opposition based on their recent skid to their current win streak. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car into the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. It's Locked On's NFL Mock Draft Live on April 17th at 7 p.m., streaming on Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on April 17th at 7 p.m. to hear who the local experts of Locked On are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft is on April 17th at 7 p.m., streaming live on Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Back on this Monday, April 15th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Here with Alex Donno, who you could hear him on the intermission and post game from time to time on the Florida Panthers Radio Network. Also the host of Locked On Canes and Locked On ACC. It's funny, Alex. There's more. It's crazy how now with the Locked On ACC channel how there's like quite a few Panthers connections now with you and then Jackson Holzer of Locked On Syracuse. It's crazy how small that community is as far as loving this franchise that resides in Sunrise, Florida. So little observation there.
Yeah. And I find that, I even a good buddy of mine who, was originally from Canada and recently moved down to Florida within the past few years. He was already a Florida Panthers fan even before he moved down here. Now he lives in Broward County. He's a season ticket holder. So I don't know, that there's just something about it, Armando, that, the idea, I don't know if it's just the idea of a hockey team in Florida doing so well that trips some people out who aren't even from the area, that they enjoy it. But this is just a really likable team. I mean, you look at especially some of the career arcs. I mean, you mentioned Oliver Ekman-Larsson earlier. What a story he's been this year after being the subject of the biggest buyout in NFL history. And he comes down to Florida. He has a renaissance. I think the renaissance just of Sergei Bobrovsky since he arrived in Florida, because I know there was a lot of negativity around Bob first couple of years after he signs, the big deal from Columbus. But he's, I don't know whatever it was those first couple of years, he has returned to his form over the past few years. And Bob has been an absolute revelation in net. I believe Barkov is one of the more likable players in hockey. And I don't know what's not to like about a guy like Matthew Tkachuk, and then the way Sam Reinhart has played for the last couple of seasons. So this is just, there's nothing not to like about this Panthers team, unless you're, somebody who's been knocked out by the Cats in the playoffs last year, maybe. But other than that, it's just a really likable club.
Yeah, and we saw a tweet from a Toronto account saying, the Panthers are having these prices as far as their tickets for it. I'm like, hey, I'd rather them be affordable than corporate sponsors taking up the majority of the seats. And it sounding like like a library there. So that's
Oh,
what
I've
you're.
heard, like, dude, I've got a good friend of mine who's he's actually a big Edmonton Oilers fan, but he lives in Toronto, and he despises the Leafs. Like, it's just weird. Like, he's surrounded by Leafs fans, obviously living there. And one of the big complaints that he has is just how corporate it is, and how, like, it's impossible to get a ticket to a game, and it's not affordable. Like, it's like the NFL on steroids up there. So it's just, I don't know, for whatever reason. Obviously, not to insult Leafs Nation, because there's obviously a lot of Maple Leafs fans, but one of the biggest Maple Leafs haters is a buddy of mine who happens to live right there.
Yeah, so we have it pretty good as far as affordability when it comes to tickets.
Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned Sergei Bobrovsky and how he's turned around 700 games now for him. Also, big congratulations to Bill Zito, now being named an assistant GM for Team USA for the Four Nations face-off next year, and the U.S. Olympic team too for 2026. So big congratulations to them. Also, Jack Devine, now two-time national champion for the University of Denver in the NCAA, winning the championship over Boston College 2-0 on Saturday too. So big things as far as Florida Panthers, not just the team directly, but also Anton Lundell has scored 4 goals in the last 6 games now for him. And if Lundell is not the biggest X factor for the Panthers, then who is it for you?
Oh my goodness. See, this is I want to try to explain my point on this, because I know some people would say, how can you call this an X factor? But to me, I've seen enough NHL postseason runs where even if you have confidence in your goaltender, if they just don't step up in playoff runs, like, I've even seen some, playoff runs within the last 7-8 years when, Roberto Luongo just wasn't hot when he needed to be in the postseason, for as much as we love him and everything. So to me, goaltending, you can call it the most important thing, but I also call it the most important X factor. So I look at Bob, because Armando, how many times also in Florida Panthers history, how many times have the Panthers gone up against a team in the playoffs where the goaltender that they go up against is not even the guy who was like the regular starter for that team in the regular season, but they get hot? Like, it was like, I remember the
Thomas
Islanders
Greiss in 2016.
Yeah, great. That's the one I was thinking of. Thomas Greiss in 2016, when he stepped up and became an X factor for them, and it was like unplayable. You couldn't score on that guy. So, I mean, Lundell is obviously a huge one for me. But I look at consistency in goaltending. Bob needs to stay in the sort of zone that he's been in as of late.
Yeah, so definitely it's crazy because of how it's carried over to this year, and then now, which, by the way, I will have an article coming out later today on how Stolarz and Bob together has had multiple organizational benefits, but one of the benefits has just been, even if Stolarz doesn't sign next year for the Panthers and he goes somewhere else, up and down you have zero. You haven't had to make one goalie call up too this year. Spencer has been able to develop a whole year in Charlotte too, and it's just really when Paul Maurice fills up that lineup card, you just put those 2 names, and they're on track to win their first Jennings Trophy ever in the franchise's history. So it's really great how, when you think about the transition for the goaltending excellence department for when that was formed a few years ago, how much it's paying off. I mean, even at points, even before the department was launched, Chris Driedger had a good stretch of starts for the Panthers right before he signed with the Seattle Kraken too. I mean, it's been goaltending has been kind of it hasn't been talked about how great historically the Panthers have actually had in goaltending as far as that. I mean, you've had some rough luck as far as like Thomas Vokoun in the late 2000s as well. And also with Luongo, even before he ended up going to Vancouver. So, I mean, this luxury that the Panthers have, it's basically their backbone.
Yeah, and it needs to be. It's I look at goaltending in hockey the same way that I look at starting pitching in Major League Baseball. Like, it, obviously we can talk about hitting in baseball the same way we talk about goal scorers in hockey and even defensemen, because the bottom line is, if you're going to be facing 30, 40 shots in some of these playoff games, if you don't have elite goaltending once you get to the postseason, no matter how good the other 5 men on the ice are. It's not going to translate to wins. So and especially this time of year, once you get to the playoffs and the physicality ramps up and the stakes get so much higher, the margins get so much slimmer. That, to me, it always starts and ends with goaltending.
Yeah, and especially because you know what's on the other side, and an almost 70 goal score in Austin Matthews, what he's doing right now. I know you were able to neutralize him last year, and John Tavares and all too last year, but I'm not going to expect the same thing in back-to-back years where neither of them get on the score sheet for the Leafs if they do face. But it's going to be a tougher challenge as they brought a little bit more of sandpaper as far as the forward depth. Still a lot of questions on the blue line, which that's something to preview later on in the week. Not something to dig into too much right now for them. But as far as that, if you got the goaltending, that's definitely going to help you. And Bob has just been incredible for the Panthers too. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss also more about the penalty differential. What happened before this 3-game winning streak for the Panthers, and how important is that also to carry it over to the postseason? We're going to discuss this and more here on Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper, and we're almost the NHL regular season is almost completed. And regardless of where the Florida Panthers are in the standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Cats fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Third and final segment here on this Monday, April 15th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. Here with Alex Donno. You could hear him from time to time here on the pre-intermission and post-game show on the Florida Panthers Radio Network, and also the host of Locked On Canes and Locked On ACC. So, didn't really look up the exact numbers until yesterday going into this morning but it has been noticeable for the Panthers about what has been happening in these last 3 games at home where they have not gone to the box as much and as much as they have previously. Even going towards the end of their homestand, they're having a hard time staying out of the box. But thankfully for the Panthers, Donno, they were still able to weather the storm as far as penalty kill percentage at 85.7 from March 24th all the way to April 6th. But they did go 3-4-1 in that. But for some context there, even though your penalty kill was almost 86% there, you're still spending a lot of time on your defense in your own zone. So the penalty differential, the power play differential in those 8 games was 42 for the opposition to 21 for the Panthers. So 2/3 of the penalties were going to the opposition. And
wow.
And yeah, look, the big difference in that,
and you know what, that feels about right, Armando, because during that stretch, I felt like there were some aberrations with the officiating where, like, sometimes you feel like, wait, they really called that for them and they don't call that for us. And I'm not a conspiracy guy with officials. I just think you go through stretches sometimes where you feel less fortunate, sometimes where you feel more fortunate. That was one of those periods because it's like, man, the Panthers are doing so well on 5-on-5, but they can't stay at 5-on-5.
And think about it. On Saturday, first 5-on-5 goal since the Boston game and all too there. So it's been a while since the Panthers have given up a goal at 5-on-5. So. But now now you're thinking about it, the 42-21 in that 8 games, that's almost 3 penalties of a difference per game. That's quite a lot. But now this time this recent stretch, it's 10-6 in favor of Florida. Their penalty kills not exactly at the same differential. It's a little lower, but you're spending less time in your end. You're playing your game how you need to play, and also we saw that on Saturday of how even though the Panthers didn't get that game winner until overtime, you're seeing how the offensive zone time was almost double for the Panthers against the Sabres on Saturday. So that's big for them. Power play still needs to, they're still like just about floating around 9-10% since March 24th. But I mean, listen, if you want to win, you got to come. It's about timely power play. It's not always the percentages, and also what you're going to do at 5-on-5, because you're going to get somewhere between the 2 to 4 power plays per game in the postseason. Sometimes they're going to be, as the rounds get later, maybe even less for the Panthers. So this stretch, as far as special teams, not necessarily the percentages, but tilting the ice is I can't stress how important it's been. And the Panthers, thankfully for them, they've answered the bell.
Yeah, and it's also like you mentioned, timely power plays, of course, and then on the flip side, avoiding the timely penalty killing situations. Because I can recall one of the more recent games that I worked on the broadcast was the 3-2 shootout victory against Detroit. Thankfully, the Panthers were able to get the 2 points in that one, but they had, I think, late in regulation, they were down a man, which really hurt their chances to try to find the game winner. And then in overtime, they went down a man for a stretch. So then, they had to get it to the shootout and eventually grind it out. But thankfully, it's not something that affects the Panthers in the standings, but they did basically give a free 1 point to the opposition before grinding out that second, which is something you all obviously want to avoid. And then just in general, like during the skid, you can explain a lot of the skid versus the run just based on that stat alone. So I'm glad you gave it. But just in a general sense, I felt like during that skid, the Panthers looked very sloppy. They looked very tired at times, where I feel like during the streak now, they found their legs and they found their defense and their goaltending. And there's just been a difference with the energy. Like I feel like Armando, for a team that basically last year from January on had to play with playoff intensity. This year, maybe they had the luxury of kind of taking their foot off the gas for a little bit, but the foot is very much back on the gas now as we head towards the playoffs. It's looked like a different team in terms of, they were still able to score goals during the skid, but in terms of the way they've been able to step up and defend, it's looked like a Panthers team that's ramping up now for the playoffs.
Yeah, and I just consistently think of game 1 of last year against Carolina, about how Bob 55 of 55 at 5-on-5, and the only 2 goals that he gave up were on the penalty kill. So you think about how the game slows down. It's not as much up tempo for them, and the Panthers, with their ability to slow it down too, that's extremely important for them as far as what they're doing too. So it's for them, this has been a very crucial time for them as far as getting the game right, and also it also goes back to the fact of resting emotionally, and I can't emphasize this enough, how going back to their first game of this homestand, now that they clinch home ice, they're going to be at home for almost 3 weeks, and with practices being at War Memorial, it being close by to the players, there's better recovery for going into those games, and even before going on a flight to their away city, because if you were still practicing at Coral Springs or at times in the arena, then you obviously your things are packed before you go on a plane if you happen to be traveling the same day. So there's a lot of things that are cut out as far as being at home, and also the luxury of having that facility there. And I think that that's really going to help the Panthers' mental game as far as that when they get to the postseason.
Yeah, 100%. And the mental game, it's just so important, especially since, listen, I've covered postseasons in the NBA. I've covered NFL playoff teams, although in terms of the Miami Dolphins, they don't usually get very far in the playoffs. But yeah, I've covered so many Florida Panthers playoff runs, specifically when they went so deep last season. I going all the way back to 1996. I was a kid. I went to some of those games in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Penguins, which was awesome. And to me, like, the most grueling postseason is hockey. Like when you go to those, and this, Mondo, when you go to these games, you're like, how are they, you're going to have to win 16 games to win a championship. You may have to play 28 games if all series go. Like, how are they going to do it? It's so much more intense than the regular season. And it's why you need guys like, we talk about Anton Lundell and the streak that he's been on. And he's got a history of peaking late in the regular season and into the postseason, which is great. It's why you were right to bring him up as a possible X factor. And with Lundy having 4 goals scored in his last 6 games, he's also someone who had a tough start to the regular season. So he's really gotten himself together mentally. I mean, you have someone like Sam Reinhart, who's now scored 55 goals. You feel like you can count on him to recreate that magic during the postseason. So yeah, I think the opportunity for them, and that's another thing with the importance of home ice, is to be able to spend that extra time, less travel in your own practice facility. I think that's going to be key as well.
Yeah, the Panthers played a total of 103 games from opening night last season to Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final. 103 total.
It's
and that
brutal.
is going to require some time where you have an injury, at, like, for example, Aaron Ekblad getting hurt in round 1 and playing through that fractured leg. Sam Bennett having a fracture in his leg and not even telling anybody neither until after too. Radko, Brandon Montour last season. The list goes on and on and on. And it's gonna be crazy what we hear at the end of this one, regardless of how far the Panthers go, of who's dealing with what, and the sacrifices it takes to hopefully bring Lord Stanley's Cup. Hashtag because it's the cup, right? So that's really the mindset that's what they work all their life for, in order to just win that trophy. It's funny because for Hockey Saturday on ABC, Mark Messier had the cup and he was getting it towards PK Subban to like tease him to try to touch it. And he's like running away from it too because he's never won. So did you happen to see that, by the way?
No, I didn't see it, but I'm going to look for that as soon as rock. That's funny. And I love it. To me, the Stanley Cup, it's the greatest trophy in sports. Like, I've had a chance to, of course, not touch it because you don't touch it. But
I haven't touched it
either, I think 3 times I've had a chance to be next to the cup, take photos with the cup. And there's like an aura about it. There's so much superstition and history behind it. I love it.
Yeah, and the one time that I was able to see it at All-Star Weekend here in South Florida, I just took a picture next to it, did not touch it. So
yeah, and you have doesn't the cup has like its own security guard? Like there's always
the keeper of the cup. Yep.
Yeah, the keeper of the cup. It's like the president or something. It's got like a Secret Service person with it at all times. Yeah, it's crazy.
I love that's what makes it so great, and the fact that you don't keep it neither, that it gets passed on. That's what makes it's so great. But Donno, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast to talk all about Florida Panthers, get them getting home ice, and also discussing the differences between penalty differential versus through a skid through and now. Too, and hopefully this carries over for the Panthers going into the postseason, which we are expecting for them to start on Saturday night if they do in fact play the Toronto Maple Leafs. But tell everybody where they can find you and your work online, my friend.
Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, great show, and that was a pretty awesome stat about the penalty minutes. It's very telling. Yeah, you can find me on X at Alex Donno, Donno spelled Donno. You can find me at Locked On Canes, where we talk Miami Hurricane sports, particularly football, every single day, and on Locked On ACC, where we talk about everything going on in the Atlantic Coast Conference. So thank you guys so much. And Armando, you enjoy the rest of your week, and let's get that playoff run coming up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you soon, my friend.
You too.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Alex Donno, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.